For the learning this week, I'm inviting you to have a Chumash open in front of you because we're going to do a lot of reading out of the Chumash as well, out of the Eitz Chaim. So open that, but I'll also pass out a sheet of learning. We're on page, let's start with the Chumash open to 898. 898. Okay. All right. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're going to start our learning. I'll ask that people bring their conversations to a close and get those Chumashim. In the Torah portion this week in Parshat Balak, we have a wonderful, colorful, cartoonish setup of a roving cast of characters. It was a real gift as a bat mitzvah parsha. It was a real gift of a parsha as a bat mitzvah parsha because it was magical and parable-esque. It was full of different. It's very hard to hear in this room when other people are speaking, even if it feels like a whisper. Kids' voices are an exception. I want to be clear because, she's an exception. That's a beautiful sound in this room. But if adults who are able to be quiet can be quiet, that would be very helpful. There are lots of people in this room, myself included, who are hard of hearing, and even with a microphone, it can be very difficult. Thank you. So in this parsha, these magical special characters are particularly a gift because I would say, with no denigration to the book of Vayikra and to most of the book of Bamidbar, that is not, by and large, the experience of reading the quote-unquote narrative for the last many, many chapters. What have we mostly been digging into? Mostly. Once we get to Yitro, and we receive the 10 Commandments, the vast majority of what we are learning about is what? Laws is a great shorthand word for that, right? We've been learning different, basically, expectations of the divine for our people. And some places along the way, we get narratives about what happens when people don't like the expectations or choose not to obey the expectations of God. The most obvious and earliest one is the story of the golden calf. The people are impatient, Moshe is up the mountain, and so they build an idol, which turns out to be exactly what they're told at the beginning of those Aseret HaDibrot they're not supposed to do. They're supposed to believe in God and not need any physical representation to do that. Recently, as in just a parsha and a half ago, we had another narrative about someone who was uncomfortable in the Israelite community with that which was commanded. What's that one from just about a parsha and a half ago? Korach and Adat Korach, or Bnei Korach, this notion that Korach and a band of perhaps as many or as few as 250 people were uncomfortable with the apparent authority that Moshe and Aharon had in that community, and stood up to Moshe and Aharon, who in turn opened this up to judgment of the divine, and Korach and his followers meet what kind of an end? Is it a good end? No. The narrative does not end in favor of Korach, but rather in something that I want to point out is also in the realm a little bit, another little taste of parable or instructive story. Because what's the highly exaggerated thing that happens to Korach and his people? The earth swallows them up whole, which comes from, there are many different types of literature historically in the Near Eastern world. One of those types of literature, for example, is wisdom literature, like the books we have, like Chronicles or like Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, these notions that there are pithy, I don't mean that in a denigrating sense, but like little sayings that we learn one after another. Who is wise? And then finish that thought, right? This notion of just wisdom that's said one after another. We have a lot of wisdom literature in the canon. We also have, sprinkled throughout our 5 books of Torah, a lot of parable. We have a lot of stories that are meant to teach us a particular lesson. They are high in symbolism, high in exaggeration. And that's not to say that I'm expressing the notion that the vision of a miracle is an exaggeration of what was experienced. The point is they were exaggerated experience. If you want to look at them as a literal accounting of what took place, that's nuts. Clearly, the people who witnessed Korach, that must have been the craziest thing they witnessed and lived to survive in their lifetimes. We're talking about really exaggerated and big picture stories. Balak is full of this too, and I'm making a point of it because Balak is one of those little islands in Bamidbar where we get so much of it. The story begins with a king and a sorcerer. The king, Balak, does not like the Jewish people. What are the principal reasons Balak gives for not liking the Jewish people? He keeps it pretty simple. You can take a look if you want to look into the text. It starts at about page 894 and goes to 895. At the bottom of page 894, Ve'ata lecha na'ora li, that verse that Marshall pointed out, right? Put a curse upon this people, et ha'am hazeh, ki atzum hu mimeni. What does that mean? They're too numerous for me. Who said that before? Pharaoh in the story of Joseph. Who said that after? It's kind of a trick question, but not really a trick question. It's from another book much later in our Tanakh. Who also finds that we are too outspread and problematic? In a later book of the Tanakh. I mean, Moses, that's an interesting and complicated observation, but there's another non-Jewish villainous figure who says the problem with the Jewish people is, yes, there is a people amongst you who is Haman, boo, Haman. Haman says in his plea to the king Achashverosh, the people are too numerous and they do not follow the king's laws. And this is the problem, and this is why we should get rid of them. People are always uncomfortable when they feel that there's a presence of too many Jews, and the narrative of Jewish people being too embedded in deep state goes back to Torah. That idea, that narrative we see in the villainous voices of Torah and in Tanakh across the board. What's the problem with the Jewish people? According to the word of Torah, in the eyes of the people who hate the people of Israel, they are too powerful, too numerous. This is the issue at hand. So Balak hires a sorcerer he's heard of called Balaam or Bilam, depending on the pronunciation you're using. I'll use Bilam as I refer to him. He calls upon Bilam and hires him to come and curse the people. That's the verse that we were just looking at. And Bilam ostensibly says, sure, no problem. Why is Bilam apparently comfortable doing this? The text itself doesn't give us many clues, but if you know the story a little bit, what is the thing that the king asks of Bilam? What is the thing that the king asks of Bilam and promises Bilam that gets him to do it? He says, curse the people, and if you curse the people, what's he promising Bilam? Rich. That's right. He says riches. Don't refuse to come to me, right? At first, Bilam says, I'm not interested. And Balak says, don't worry. Please come. I'll make you rich. Page 896, verse 17. Ki chabed achabedcha. I'll make it heavy. What will he make heavy? He'll make heavy his purse. Okay, I will, and also there's a hint in there, by the way. What does chabed also have a relationship with? Kavod or kibud, of honor. So it's kind of an entendre from my perspective. Not only is he literally promising, I'm going to make your purse heavy with riches and with metals, I'm going to make you well known for cursing this Jewish people. But along the way, the donkey that he's riding upon appears to act in the name of God. Take a look in the middle of page 897. He's riding along this, what's noted in the English as she-ass, which means the female donkey. He's riding along his atono, this she-donkey, when the ass sees something that he doesn't see. What does this atono, his donkey, see that he doesn't see? Does he see God? Or she see God? No. She sees a malach. She sees an angel standing in the pathway. And the angel stations itself over and over again, such that the donkey cannot proceed. But Bilam doesn't see the angel. What does Bilam see? That his donkey is not moving. And what do you do when your donkey isn't moving? I don't know if anyone here is a horseback rider or has ever ridden a donkey. What do? I've ridden donkeys. I've ridden horses. You give them a kick. You talk to them. You pull the reins. You give them a smack. You start yelling, why aren't you moving? Why aren't you moving? Because animals have an idea of their own, what they want to do. But in this case, we, the reader, part of what makes this such an interesting parable and the structure of parable is that typically speaking, the reader of the Tanakh, the reader of the Torah, doesn't usually know what the characters do. No. The reader doesn't usually know the things that the characters do not know. Okay? Typically speaking, we don't hold more knowledge. It's rare. That's part of what makes this piece of Bamidbar feel so different than the pieces of Bamidbar that come before it, with the exception a little bit of Korach, is that generally speaking, we're witness, the narration, the story is told to us, and we know what the characters know. For example, the text might say, and then the people saw the earth open up, right? But we don't usually get, what they didn't know is that God was waiting to open up the earth. But here we do get a story along those lines. We get the story that we know that the angel is there, but we know that Bilam doesn't know that the angel is there, which is why we understand that he is motivated to just be angry at the donkey. It's how we get to see into the story. We know everything, but Bilam doesn't. We're going to come back to this page in a moment, because the donkey does not seem to change Bilam's mind. The donkey cannot stop, or rather, the angel of the Lord cannot stop the donkey from stopping Bilam. So where does Bilam make it to? Balak and to the people, and to make this curse. But then we see a new piece of the narrative. I'm going to pass out papers, and I'll ask you to share them, one for every other person. So please share with the person next to you. Formatting's not great, with apologies. Okay, it's something, take one for every other person. Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep referencing the Chumash because there's much more interesting observation. This is really a supplement because there's so much story to read in the Tanakh itself. I'm going to keep us looking into the Tanakh. We're on page 898. The text, verse 31. Vaigal Adonai et einei Bilam. And God uncovered the eyes of Bilam. Vayar. What is Vayar besides a pirate's favorite Hebrew word? To see. Vayar, va is the vav hayipuch. It kind of flips around from being what might refer to the future and instead makes it once upon a time this happened, vayar, and he saw. So first we get God opened Bilam's eyes. Bilam doesn't know it's God. We know it's God. God is opening Bilam's eyes. Vayar, who sees now? With open eyes, who is now seeing? Bilam. There's a lot of characters I want to make very clear. God opens Bilam's eyes. Bilam can now see. Et malach Adonai nitzav baderech. He sees the angel of God who is nitzav baderech, basically blocking the path. Vecharbo shalufa biyado vayikov vayishtachu le'apav. He sees a drawn sword in his hand, and then he bowed to the ground. Vayishtachu. Who bows to the ground? Bilam, the sorcerer, bows down to the ground. Okay. Why is he bowing down to the ground? What's changed? Who's he bowing to? Why is Bilam bowing? Because of the angel. Okay, but why? Why would he bow suddenly if he sees an angel? It's God. Oh my God, he's having the experience of his lifetime. To be clear, he's a sorcerer, but this is his earth swallowing up moment. All of a sudden, he looks and he sees an angel. And if we conceive of Bilam as any other human being in history, if suddenly it is revealed to him that there is an angel who's been standing in the way, two things are happening for him, presumably. The first is, holy wow. Did I eat some weird grass along the way here? Like, what is this vision? This is unbelievable. It's extraordinary. But there's a second thing happening in that moment. Until the moment where God opens Bilam's eyes and he sees, what does Bilam think is happening in the story? With he and his donkey. Now, before God opens his eyes, when it's just Bilam and the donkey, what does Bilam think is happening? Who gave me this donkey? What is up with this donkey? Is this donkey sick? What's happening with the donkey? And he's angry and he's mad. Yes, Adrian. Right, so the donkey has spoken, but did Bilam hear anything? Does he believe him? Does he have any belief in the experience? Let's back up a few verses, okay? Vayiftach, back to verse 28. Page 897. Vayiftach Adonai et pi ha'aton vatomer leVil'am, and he says to Vil'am, I was trying to save this. This is going to give us a little hint of something, so it kind of gives away a little bit of secret sauce, but not too much. Vatomer, it's important to the story that he does open up the mouth of this donkey, and he says to Bil'am, Me asiti lecha, what have you done to me? Ki hikitani, you've hit me. Zeh shalosh regalim, you hit me 3 times. Vayomer Bil'am la'aton, he says to his donkey, Ki hit alalt bi, Lu yeshchera biyadi. You are making me look ridiculous, and now I've got a sword in my hand. Ki ata haragatich. Now I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you, donkey. Does it seem like Bilam was actually experiencing that as the donkey really talking to him? Maybe? I don't know. Because what we see in that moment, Adrian, is that unlike the moment where he goes and he bows down to the ground and sees the angel, I don't know, we're talking donkeys more normative than like we think, or this idea of an animal speaking. Why wasn't he surprised? That's a whole other interesting shiur, but why doesn't he respond in that moment, Bilam, to this donkey talking with any sort of awe, any sort of yirah, any sort of sense of, holy crud, something amazing's happening? What do you think? Maybe because he's angry and anger blinds you. I'm going to guess in this text, and this is going to get us into the meat of things, because how much time do I really have? Like 8 minutes realistically. A little longer. There's something that happens in verse 31. Go back to page 898. There's something that happens in verse 31 that tells us that sometimes people cannot see with just the vision that they're given as human beings. And the thing that we're told in that verse is that God comes and rolls the yagal, God rolls Bilam's eyelids back, so to speak. And now Vayar, now Bilam sees. God has to open Bilam's eyes in this moment. And only with that divine eye opening is he able to see, right? Is he gifted with the opportunity to see what's happening? This is not the first time in the Tanakh when this happens. I have a whole bunch of examples, but hold your finger in page 897 for a moment. And I want you to go all the way back to page 150. back in Bereshit, land of the parables and stories and magical happenings, back when God appeared to people with so much more regularity according to the story, and take a look at the story that I'll give us context, reintroduce you to the context. In Parshat Toldot, Isaac, who is the son of Abraham, stays back in Gerar. And when the people of the place ask him about his wife, who is his wife? Isaac and Rivka, right? We have Yitzchak and Rivka. When the people in the place ask him about his wife, he says to those people, she is my sister, because if he had said, this is my wife, and they had wanted to take her as a wife, the custom in their Near Eastern context is that they would have killed the living husband such that they could take the woman. But if it's just his sister, no worries. By the way, this is not the first time we hear this story, but this shiur is too short for me to point to all the times this happens. Avraham, Isaac's father, already did this to Sarah way back a few chapters ago. So we know where Isaac got the idea from, okay? It's not a total surprise. This is something that's been pulled before. But I'm pulling this particular example for a reason. Look into the text. If they were to ask after her, please let them know she's just my sister. And then something happened. Some time passed, and then look at midway through verse 8. Okay, so some time had passed, and now Avimelech, this is the king of the people who are in Gerar. Avimelech, Melech Plishtim, the king of the Philistines, Be'ad Achalon, he's beside the window. Vayar, there's our verb. Vehine, and there it was, Yitzchak mitzachek. Yitzchak was Yitzchaking / playing et Rivka. This is euphemistic. He sees Isaac being a husband with a wife through the window. He spots them and he goes, well, that's obviously not his sister. Okay, that's not what the text says, but clearly that's not a brother and sister, I hope, right? And so he sees that, and what does he say? Vayikra Avimelech Yitzchak. He calls out to Yitzchak. It's not very clear in this verse. I think that the as a sidebar, I think that the plain read of this text is that he screams out in that moment for Yitzchak and calls him to him. The text, the translation here, and many rabbinic reads on this text want to read it that he went and he called for him later properly as a king. You know, he took his chariot home, he sent his messenger, he got himself back into made sure that his amygdala was calmed down and he was ready to speak to this person in his powerful position. I don't think that happened, according to the Parshat of the text. That's just Rabbi-Cantor Chorny's read. I think in that moment, Vayikra Avimelech, he calls out to Yitzchak, Vayomer, hine. He says ach, which is a great onomatopoeic word, because it's like, that might be what I said also in that position. Ach. Okay, so ach, hine ishtechahi. Obviously, this is your wife. Ve'ech amarta chotihi. How did you say that she's my sister? How come, and how could it have been? How? Why? Vayomer elav Yitzchak ki amarti pen amut alecha. I was afraid that I would die by your hand. And what does Avimelech say back to him? Vayomer Avimelech, verse 10. Ma zot asita lanu. What have you done to us? It's rhetorical. What have you done to us? Because he knows that if Avimelech does something to the wife of Yitzchak, who is in the favor of the Lord, he's in trouble. Perhaps he even knows the end of the story of what happened to Pharaoh when Abraham passed off his wife as his sister, and Pharaoh was burdened with 1,000 curses or something of the sort, right? He was punished divinely. Avimelech is like, get yourselves out of here, this is terrible. And he uses this phrase, ma zot asita lanu, what have you done? By the way, this is the same phrase that Pharaoh uses when he looks back and realizes that he's lost all his slaves. Ma zot asinu, what have we done? How have we let all of our slaves go? And this is right before he gives chase to them at the sea. Flipping back to page 897 in the text. Actually, flip ahead to, flip ahead to page 901, but we're right there in the same story. Balaam goes up to the top of the mountain, opens his mouth to curse the people as he was hired to do. And what comes out of his mouth? Bracha. Ma tovu ohalecha, Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Wow, how glorious, how beautiful. Skipping over the many parts of the story where God talks to Balaam and Balaam says, I got to do this, but then Balaam isn't capable of doing it. Balak sees that this blessing, which he did not pay for, he paid for curses. And now here is a blessing. What does he say? Verse 11, Vayomer Balak el Balaam, me asita li. What have you done to me? Lakov oyevai lakachticha. I brought you here to curse my enemies. Vehine berachta varech. And you have blessed them. Yes, blessed them. Then Balak says to him, Lecha na'iti al makom acher asher tirenu misham. Let me take you to a place where you can see them too. Because Balaam's eyes have been opened. This is the back and forth. The one who can see and the one who can't. The donkey who can see the angel and then not Balaam. The king or the pharaoh whose eyes have been opened and all of a sudden they understand that God will be upset at what they have done to the wife of one of God's chosen people. Even back up in the text, this is the part when Adrian, you asked about, but the donkey had opened its mouth. What does the donkey say? Back up to page 897. The donkey gives us a little hint of what's to come with the mezot asita li ideas. He says, our text says, "Vayivtach Adonai et pi ha'aton." God opens up the mouth of the donkey. Vatomer leVilam, and she says, the donkey says to Bilam, "Me asita lecha ki hikitani." Right? What have I done to you? The me asita language is code language in our text. It's code language for you are lacking insight and you are lacking foresight. With that, I want to turn to something that's on the page that you have in front of you. And this is a teaching from the School of Maharat from Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, who gave me some of the ideas at the core of this. Some of the ideas here I learned from my amazing teacher, Rabbi Amy Kalmanovsky, who studies the books of Torah as literature and is really a remarkable reader of the text when it comes to understanding how, in context, Near Eastern cultures would have understood this. Sarah Hurwitz wants us to understand this from a modern perspective, from a contemporary perspective, about those who have foresight and those who do not have foresight. She says, but Balaam, on the front of the page, it says Parshat Balak, but Balaam's power of speech had limitations. At the beginning of the narrative, there seems to be an intrinsic critique of Balaam. In a subversion of the natural order, Balaam's donkey not only spoke, but was also able to see the angel of God blocking their way. It was not until God opened Balaam's eyes did he truly realize that words are not enough. His mission must be to have sight as well. Pause here. Adrian, I think that Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz's answer to your question would be, right, sometimes you can't believe something or really hear it until you see it. And that seems to be what's happening in the text from her perspective, right? So then, when one is truly able to see, he has insight to speak the words of God and not his own. From that moment on, Balaam's speech and ultimately his blessings are preceded by the ability to see. Balak takes Balaam to Bamot Baal, where he raises his eyes, and the Torah then goes on and clarifies that he's able to see. Switch to the back of the page. I have a bunch of different texts here that speak to the notion of eyes being opened. I want to say one last word about the notion of foresight, and then I want to say something about God and God's ability to see. I think that Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz's point here is that very often it takes more than one nudge for us to understand a very, very big truth. Big truths, even when they're right in front of us, are not clear. Sometimes we don't see the angel. Sometimes we don't understand that we're in a place of God, like perhaps even awaking from a dream and saying, I feel terrible because I didn't even know that this place was a place of God, as Yaakov felt. And the feeling of realization that one didn't know what this big truth was is something that's relatable even to this moment of human experience, even not when it comes to divinity. When one works really, really, really hard to be open-minded, the best case scenario at the end of that struggle is that our eyes are opened, often to difficult to see truths. And when we see those truths, either you could compare this to Avimelech or Paro, who say Mezot asita lanu, or when we see those truths and suddenly we, like Bilam, find ourselves falling to the ground, it's because we might be questioning all the things that we did in our life before we realized that. Human beings experience the world in a linear fashion and one directionally. Hindsight is 20/20. And so is divine revelation, right? It brings great clarity. And perhaps I want to name that in the ideal state in the world, we are open-minded enough all the time, such that the best thing that could happen to us is that we learn that we were wrong about something big. That's what I set out to do, learning every day, not to reinforce my own notions of what's taking place in the world or my own notions of Torah, but rather looking at sacred texts and looking out at the world and seeing what might change my mind. I think that what Rabbi Hurwitz is pointing out is that we, at the same time as we need to allow ourselves to feel the big feelings of what happens when we realize something, and we understand that the world might be upended or our world might be upended if we lean into that truth, we also ought to offer ourselves forgiveness, because there is no such thing as 2020 foresight, right? We can't possibly know what we don't know until we know it. Once we know it, then we can do what we will with it and we can be good people. But until then, we have to also forgive ourselves, and we have to forgive ourselves sort of that reaction. I just want to point out one last thing, lest this seemed like a bit of a shiur on the notion that human beings are the ones who are fallible, who cannot see all, and God needs to open our eyes to things. We have to understand that the Torah itself is telling us that even God experiences a certain sense of I want to make sure this is clearly not ableist language, but a blindedness, a very literal blindedness, as if God has eyes and God's eyes were not open and there is a blind spot to seeing, okay? Not comparing it to the human experience of blindness, but rather a divine experience of blindness. I'll offer two examples, one that's on the page and one that isn't. One is Vayar Adonai ki snua Leah. Finally, after Leah, who is the wife of Yaakov, one of the wives of Yaakov, makes the proper pleas to God, we don't learn that God sort of decided to open Leah's womb. We first learn that God finally saw that barrenness, which speaks to the limitation of God's omniscience. I won't get too much into the notion of process theology, but it's pretty impossible that God is all present, all good, and all knowing at the same time. Here we see that God's all knowingness, God's omniscience is at fault. God does not know everything everywhere all at once, according to the Torah text. Even God, for whatever reason, couldn't see that Leah was barren, and once God saw, God uncovered that barrenness and opened the womb, so to speak. And the other place that we revisit this, of course, is in the narrative of the Exodus that we recount on the night of Seder, which is that God finally heard the cries of the Israelites and relieved them after, the text tells us, hundreds upon hundreds of years. Do we think that in those hundreds of years they weren't crying out? Something happened and something opened God's eyes to that moment, and God too is fallible. The world, from the divine realm, the supernal realm, down to the earthly realm, is full of insight and foresight to be taken, and then we can only do with it once we actually see. God can only act once God actually sees, and human beings can only act once they see as well. But the lesson here isn't then to say, okay, since we can't know what we don't know, it's fine to act as we do in this world and not consider it. Rather, it's a call to action about striving for vayar, striving for sight, for foresight, and for insight into the world. We should be walking through the world assuming we cannot see everything and not everything has been revealed to us yet. When we do that, we open ourselves up to experiences that will be humbling and will be challenging to us, but also allow us to live in like whatever the next chapter of understanding and whatever next plane of existence is open to us in the world. As a closing thought, I'll just say, kind of saving this for a High Holy Day sermon at some point in the near future. It is for this reason that I am grateful for people whose stories about how they hold power in the world or how they think about the world. This goes for people in my family and goes for people out there in the public sphere, people who are in positions of authority. It is a great relief to me that people are inconsistent. We're not meant to be consistent people. If we were consistent people, if I believed the same thing now as I did in the year 1998 about anything in the world, then I haven't been looking, right? Because new truths are revealed all the time. We're in a world of scientific wonderment, of exploration, and in a really spiritual level, we are gifted the opportunity all the time to have our eyes opened up and to have our eyelids rolled back, which is to say that it also isn't just about my change in myself. Even if I'm not undergoing profound change, I'm really grateful when I see people out there in the world who are being accused in their positions of power and authority of being flip-floppers and not acting the way that they might have, being called to response. In this world where you can find recordings of people talking on the same topic and holding completely different positions decades ago, what a beautiful thing, instead of saying, how is this person so inconsistent? Praising them for being the kind of human being who is willing to have their eyes opened up to new truths and new revelations. So I hope you go into this week ready to have eyes opened, and into the rest of this year and summer, ready to have eyes open and to understand then those moments, those are the closest that we get to moments of revelation in the way that we understand the world today. But wouldn't it be cool if also there were still talking donkeys? And I'm still willing to believe in that level of miracle and fun and wonderment in the world as well.